Years ago, I visited Peg Leg Porker in Nashville, which is famous for dry ribs, and ever since, I've wanted to make my own. Dry ribs are ribs that are coated in rub as the last step instead of the first. I love the concept because it allows the rub to really shine through and gives my family and friends the choice of sauce to dip and sample to their preference. The interesting thing about this recipe is I don't need to do anything to the ribs before they go on the smoker. All I need to do is remove the membrane from the back. Now, these ribs are going to need some smoke and lots of it. So I'm firing up my Oklahoma Joe's offset with some lump charcoal. You'll notice I'm using a giant handheld flamethrower. It's called a grill gun, and I like it personally because it makes me feel nostalgic because I used to be in the military, and also it lights my charcoal in less than 60 seconds. Before we get to the video, I'd like to thank Magic Spoon for sponsoring this video. Ever since my son was born, I seem to just be losing the same 10 pounds and then gaining it back again, so I've been really trying harder to lose weight, and that's why I'm so glad that Magic Spoon sent me their cereal to try out. With 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein, only 4 net grams of carbs, and just 140 calories per serving, you'd think this cereal would taste like pressed cardboard soaked in milk, but you'd be wrong, because it's frickin' good. Personally, my favorite flavor is the fruity mix because it reminds me of eating sugary cereal as a kid, but without the sugar and without the guilt. And as a bonus, my son and wife really like it too. Magic Spoon is keto-friendly, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and low-carb, so it'll work for you regardless of whatever diet you're on currently. I also really like how they have a 100% happiness guarantee, so if I get a flavor and I don't like it, they will give me my money back, no questions asked. So click the link below and make sure to grab a variety pack using coupon code STBBQ for $5 off, or simply visit magicspoon.com/STBBQ. Now that the smoker is preheated, I fill up my water pan with some water and ice cubes. This is just to absorb some of the heat coming off the firebox and to help the pit temps stay more consistent, which is an ever-present challenge for such a small offset like this. Speaking of temps, I'm running my chamber temperature at around 225 to 250 for around 3 hours, and every 30 minutes or so I like to spritz my ribs with a 50-50 mixture of apple cider vinegar and apple juice. This just helps the ribs stay moist and adds a nice sugary tang as the ribs take on more color. If you're wondering, I'm using chunks of cherry wood in my firebox to add some smoke. I'm not running full splits like I normally do when I'm cooking brisket because I really want to keep the temperatures low for this cook. I don't want my ribs getting too burnt and crispy. To keep these dry ribs from getting actually dry, which nobody wants, I wrap the ribs when the color is deep mahogany red. This could be at around the 2 or 2.5 hour mark for you, but in my case, it took 3 hours. If I wanted to go by temperature, which I often do, then I would wrap them at around 150 to 165 degrees internal. I'm wrapping the ribs meat side down with some melted butter and a few spritzes of the spritz. Now, wrapping the ribs is optional, but I highly recommend it because in all of the tests that I've done, I've consistently found that wrapped ribs are just more juicy and tender than unwrapped ribs. The wrapping also helps to render the fat in the ribs so you don't bite into a big chunk of unrendered fat. Nobody wants that. Oh, and one more thing, I'm making sure to tighten up the foil so I can easily open and close it multiple times and still create a good seal. That is going to be really important because I'm going to be opening and closing that foil a lot. After an hour, I open the foil and check for tenderness. To do that, I poke it with my probe to see if it probes tender, and I'm also bending and flexing the rack, looking for the meat to tear slightly. Now it's tearing a little bit and probes somewhat tender, but these ribs aren't quite where I want them to be. So now I close up the foil and flip the ribs around so they cook more evenly, and I'll come back every 15 minutes to check them again for tenderness. Now, this might look like a lot of work, but ask anyone who does barbecue competitions or cooks a lot of ribs. It's really the only way to ensure you pull the ribs at exactly the perfect tenderness. Pull them too early and they'll be tough. Pull them too late and they'll be dry and crumbly. Knowing exactly the right time to pull the ribs separates the pros from the amateur pitmasters, so spend a lot of time in this phase to really understand what the perfect tenderness is. I also like to flip my ribs bone side down at some point during the cook. This just allows them to cook more evenly, which is important on an offset where all the heat is primarily coming from one side of the ribs. After the ribs are done, I take them off the cooker and I let them rest for at least 15 minutes. You'll see the meat is also pulling from the bone on these ribs, which is another indicator that they could be done, but it's not always the case. Now I'm spritzing down the ribs with some spritz. That's the 50-50 apple cider vinegar and apple juice as a reminder, and then I'm applying the rub to both sides. Now, You can use whatever rub you want, but I'm using Heavy Smoke Black Label, and on the second rack, I'm using Josh DeWitt Sweet Rub. Clint from Pitmaster Barbecue sent me these rubs, and they are absolutely amazing. I've never had better rubs than the selection that he sent me. If you haven't heard of it, Pitmaster Barbecue Supply is the place to go to get rubs that are made by the best barbecue competition teams in the world. These rubs have all the next level secret ingredients in them to level up your barbecue game and one up all your barbecue friends, most importantly. I recommend picking up a few of these rubs and some of the sauces on the Pitmaster Barbecue Supply site. When you do, make sure to use code SMOKEFORCE to get 10% off your order over $35. Now, let's finish rubbing these ribs. Hopefully you guys are still around after that super cringy montage, because the last step is to slice the ribs and enjoy them with your favorite barbecue sauce. These ribs were very good, and not only because they were cooked well, but applying the rub after the cook adds some magic to the ribs that you just need to try yourself to appreciate. Instead of being cooked and washed out from hours of cooking and spritzing, the rub is really raw and the flavors are fresh and bright. It's almost like eating a sour soother with its crunchy coating of sugar. And as a bonus, I get to dip my ribs in multiple different sauces to change the flavor profile as I eat, as opposed to just being stuck with one sauce on the ribs that your family might love or hate. Even my 1-year-old son loved them, and I love the fact that years from now, Jacob is going to look back and he's going to see himself enjoying Dad's ribs. It's like a family tradition. Thanks, Pegleg Porker, for the inspiration, and if you guys enjoyed this video, then consider supporting my Patreon page. I'll link it in the description section below, and I'll see you in the next video. As always, happy smoking.